The August sun hung over Dry Creek like a curse, baking the earth until it cracked like old leather. Marion Hale stood at the edge of her mother's property, watching dust devils dance across the barren landscape. 27 years had carved lines around her eyes, not from laughter, but from squinting against the relentless Arizona glare. "Easy now, Buttercup," she murmured to the bay mare beside her, running calloused fingers through the animal's tangled mane. The horse snorted, pawing at ground that hadn't seen rain in 3 months. Marion's remaining 12 horses clustered in whatever shade the ramshackle barn provided, their ribs showing through dusty coats. The sound of approaching hooves made her stiffen. She recognized the purposeful gait of Barton Crowell's stallion before she saw him cresting the rise. The mine owner sat his horse like a man who owned everything he surveyed, which, given his holdings in Dry Creek, wasn't far from truth. "Miss Hale." Crowell tipped his hat, though his smile never reached his eyes. "I trust you've given thought to my proposal." The answer remains no. "Mr. Crowell." Marion kept her voice steady, though her hand found the fence post for support. "My mother's debts died with her." "Ah, but the law says otherwise." He produced a leather folder from his saddlebag. $600, borrowed for her final treatments. The notes come due." Marion's throat constricted. 600 might as well be 6,000. "I need time." 30 days. Crowell's tone turned magnanimous, like he was doing her a kindness. "Though I'd consider the debt settled if you'd reconsider my offer of marriage. A woman alone out here." He let the implication hang between them like smoke. After he'd gone, Marion allowed herself one moment of weakness, pressing her forehead against Buttercup's neck. The mare's heartbeat thrummed steady and strong, a rhythm that had always calmed her. The walk to town took an hour in the midday heat. Marion needed supplies she couldn't afford and information she dreaded hearing. Dry Creek's main street stretched before her like a gauntlet. She felt eyes tracking her movement, heard conversations pause as she passed. At Morrison's General Store, Clara Morrison's greeting chilled the moment she recognized Marion. "We're not extending credit," the woman said, not meeting her eyes. "I have cash." Marion placed 3 precious coins on the counter. "Just need salt and flour," while Clara measured flour with grudging precision. Marion caught her reflection in the store window. Her mother's strong jaw, her father's stubborn mouth, the dress, mended too many times, hung loose on her frame. She looked like what she was, a woman running out of options. "Heard there was some trouble at Murphy's saloon few months back," Clara said, wrapping the purchases. "Something about you and that traveling man." Marion's jaw tightened. "He grabbed me. I defended myself." Still, people talk. People always talked. One elbow to a drunk's gut. One public scene where she'd refused to be manhandled. And suddenly she was that kind of woman. The kind no decent man would marry. The kind who deserved whatever came her way. Deputy Eli Carter nodded to her outside the sheriff's office. At 25, Eli still had the earnest look of someone who believed in justice. "Miss Hale, hot one today." "Deputy." She paused, weighing her words. Hypothetically, if someone were being pressured to pay a debt that might not be entirely legal. Eli's expression grew cautious. Hypothetically, they'd need proof, documents, witnesses, and even then, if the creditor has influence. He glanced toward the Silver Dollar Hotel, where Crowell kept his offices. Justice can be complicated out here. That evening, Marion led her horses toward Skeleton Ridge, following a game trail her mother had shown her years ago. The hidden spring there might be running low, but it was water Crowell didn't control. Yet, the path wound through stands of mesquite and ironwood. Climbing gradually into the foothills, she'd need to be back before full dark. The ridge had its own dangers, but the horses needed water more than she needed safety. She heard him before she saw him. A low voice, almost musical, speaking words she didn't understand. Marian froze, her hand moving instinctively to the old colt on her hip. Through the scrub brush, she glimpsed movement. A man, working alone to free a young Mustang trapped in a muddy sinkhole near the spring. The horse thrashed weakly, exhausted from struggle. The man Indian, she realized. Though not from the reservation Apaches she'd occasionally seen in town, moved with careful purpose. He'd rigged a makeshift harness from rope and was trying to provide leverage without spooking the animal further. Marian made a decision. "You need help." The man straightened slowly, hands visible and empty. She saw him fully now, tall, lean-muscled, with the kind of stillness that came from living with danger. Scars marked his arms. His dark eyes assessed her with the same wariness she felt. "Horse needs water first," he said in careful English. "Too weak to pull free." She understood immediately. "I have canteens." Working together, they poured water over the Mustang's nose and mouth, letting it drink what it could. The man he didn't offer his name and she didn't ask showed her where to position herself. On his count, they pulled while the horse made one last effort. The Mustang came free with a sucking sound, scrambling onto solid ground where it stood shaking, caked in mud but alive. "Thank you," the man said simply. His gaze moved to her horses, noting their condition with a horseman's eye. "Spring is low, but running up there." He pointed to a cluster of cottonwoods, while the horses drank. Marian studied him sideways. Apache. Definitely, though his clothes mixed traditional and white man styles. The way he moved around the horses spoke of long experience. He handled her spirited gelding with a touch that made the horse immediately calm. "I'm Marian Hale," she offered finally. "I run horses on the other side of Skeleton Ridge." "I know." At her surprised look, he almost smiled. "Saw your mother's brand. She traded fair." He'd known her mother. That placed him as one of the mountain Apache who occasionally brought wild horses to trade. Hermits mostly, living apart from both white and reservation society. "I'm called Taza," he said after a pause, like he was making a decision too. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he watched the horizon told her he was already thinking of leaving. She understood that impulse, the need to keep moving before trouble found you. They parted at the trail fork as purple dusk claimed the valley. Marian didn't expect to see him again. Men like that survived by avoiding settlements and the complications that came with them. The night brought stillness, but not peace. Marian lay on her narrow cot, calculating numbers that wouldn't balance. 30 days. She could sell horses, but at current prices, she'd need to sell them all and still come up short. The land itself was all she had left of her parents, and Crowell knew it. She dozed fitfully, dreaming of her mother's final days. The doctor who'd demanded payment up front, the medicine that came too late, the papers she'd signed in desperation, barely reading Crowell's flowing script. The smell of smoke invaded her dreams first. Then Buttercup's terrified whinny shattered the night. Marian rolled from bed, yanking on boots and grabbing her father's old rifle. Orange light flickered through the window. The hay barn was ablaze, flames already licking at the roof beams. The horses screamed, trapped in the corral between the burning barn and the fence. Marian ran barefoot across the yard, throwing open the gate. "Get out, go!" Some bolted immediately, others terror-frozen, milled in confusion as burning hay fell like deadly rain. She plunged among them, slapping rumps, shouting herself hoarse. The heat pressed against her like a living thing. A figure materialized through the smoke. Taza, appearing as suddenly as he'd vanished hours before. Without words, they worked in concert, driving the panicked animals away from the flames. He threw a wet blanket over a mare whose tail had caught fire, smothering the flames while Marian led her clear. The barn roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. If the wind shifted, it would take her house next. Marian grabbed buckets, knowing it was futile but unable to simply watch. No. Taza caught her arm, pointing to the irrigation ditch. "Clear the brush there. Make a fire break." Of course, her mother had done the same during the drought of '81. They worked frantically, using tools and hands to create a gap the fire couldn't jump. Other hands joined theirs: Tom Avery from the neighboring ranch, his 2 sons, even sour old Wilhelm from downstream. Fire was everyone's enemy out here. By dawn, the barn was ash and twisted metal, but the house stood. Marion's horses clustered at the far end of the property, singed and spooked, but alive. All 13 of them, she counted twice to be sure. "Could have been lightning," Tom Avery said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Except there wasn't no storm." Wilhelm spat tobacco juice. "Saw riders heading toward town couple hours before the fire. Pike brothers, looked like." Everyone knew the Pikes worked for Crowell, though proving it was another matter. Marion's hands clenched, but she kept her voice level. "I'm grateful for your help, all of you." The neighbors departed with dawn, leaving her to survey the damage without stored hay. Keeping the horses through winter would be impossible. Crowell had known exactly where to strike. "Why did you come back?" she asked Taza, who'd stayed to help drag away the still smoldering timbers. He considered the question like it puzzled him too. "Saw smoke. Knew you had horses." A pause. "Your mother helped my sister once, during the fever winter." Marion remembered that winter 1883, when measles swept through white and Indian communities alike. Her mother had shared their medicine stores, ignoring the town's disapproval. "Will you stay?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "I can't pay much, but I need help rebuilding, and someone who knows horses." She expected refusal. Men like him didn't tie themselves to white settlements and their troubles. But Taza looked at the ruins of the barn, at the horses beginning to drift back, seeking normalcy. "For now," he said finally. "Until the barn stands again." It was more than she dared hope for. As the sun climbed toward another scorching day, Marion allowed herself to think not of Crowell's deadline or the town's whispers, but of the simple fact that she wasn't facing this alone. She didn't yet understand that some connections forged themselves in fire and desperate hours, that the man beside her carried his own scars from nights when help hadn't come, that in saving her horses, something in him had shifted too. For now, it was enough that when she looked at the destroyed barn, she saw not an ending but a beginning. Crowell had meant to break her. Instead, he'd given her an ally. The game had changed, though neither side knew it yet. The morning after the fire, Marion found Taza already at work, salvaging usable timber from the ruins. He'd appeared at dawn with his own tools, a well-worn axe, and saw that spoke of long use. Without discussion, they fell into a rhythm, her sorting through the debris for nails worth saving, him measuring and cutting fresh posts from deadfall he'd dragged from the ridge. "Frame first," he said when she asked about his plan. "Then walls, roof last." He showed her a notch he'd carved in the corner post. "This way, it stands stronger against wind." She recognized the technique from old Spanish buildings, adapted for the desert. Her father had built the original barn square and practical, but already she could see Taza's design would prove more durable. By midday, the heat forced them to seek shade. Marion brought water and the last of her coffee, bitter but welcome. They sat in silence that didn't feel awkward, watching dust devils spin across the valley. "Your horses need better pasture," Taza observed. "Know a place, High Meadow, 2 hours north. Apaches used it for summer grazing." "Crowell claims everything north of here." "Claims." Taza's expression suggested what he thought of white men's claims. "Meadow's been there longer than Crowell, longer than any paper." She wanted to argue about property lines and legal ownership, but the rigid set of her shoulders slowly eased. What good had following rules done her? "Show me tomorrow." He nodded, then surprised her by adding, "Bring rifle, cat tracks near there last week." They worked until sunset, accomplishing more in one day than she could have managed in a week alone. Taza's efficiency came from economy of movement, never wasting effort. When she struggled with a heavy beam, he appeared at her side without being asked, and they lifted together. That evening, as she tended the horses, Marian noticed Taza had built a simple lean-to shelter against a standing wall of the old barn. "You can sleep in the house," she offered. "The barn loft's intact." He shook his head. "Better outside. Can hear trouble coming." She understood. Walls could trap as easily as protect. The next dawn found them saddling horses for the journey to the high meadow. Marian chose Buttercup. Taza rode a paint gelding she'd acquired just before her mother's illness. The horse had been difficult, prone to bucking, but under Taza's hand it moved smooth as silk. The trail wound upward through juniper and pinon, the air cooling as they climbed. Taza rode ahead, reading signs in bent grass and disturbed stones. Once, he held up a hand, and they waited while a small herd of elk crossed their path. "You were a scout," Marian said. It wasn't a question. "Was..." His tone discouraged elaboration. But after a moment, he added, "Fort Apache, 5 years, then no more." She knew better than to push. Men who'd scouted for the army often found themselves caught between worlds, trusted by neither side. The fact he'd told her even that much felt significant. The meadow, when they reached it, took her breath away. Hidden in a bowl between ridges, it stretched green and lush, fed by a spring that bubbled from limestone rocks. Grass grew stirrup-high, and wildflowers painted splashes of color: Indian paintbrush, desert marigold, sacred datura. "How is this possible?" she breathed. "Underground river surfaces here. Always has." Taza dismounted, showing her ancient marks on the rocks. Many generations knew this place. While the horses grazed, he taught her to read the land signs: mountain lion scat, old but worth noting, deer trails leading to water, which plants the horses could eat safely and which would sicken them. His knowledge came not from books, but from living close to the earth, paying attention to its rhythms. "Your mother understood," he said unexpectedly. "During the fever winter, she asked my grandmother about willow bark tea, listened, learned. Not many whites do that. She was a teacher before she married my father. Said learning never stopped, just changed subjects. Wise woman." Taza pointed to clouds building over the western peaks. "Storm coming, 2 days, maybe 3. They started back as afternoon shadows lengthened. Halfway down, they met riders coming up Lemon Jake Pike, Crowell's muscle, blocking the trail with practiced casualness. "Well now," Lem, the elder, showed tobacco-stained teeth. "Miss Hale and her Indian, cozy." "The trail's public use," Marian said evenly, though her hand drifted to her rifle. "Sure is. Just like that meadow up there's public too. Mr. Crowell's been meaning to run cattle on it. Be a shame if your horses were in the way." Taza hadn't moved, but something in his stillness made Jake's horse sidestep nervously. When he spoke, his voice carried quiet authority. "Meadow's been Apache grazing since before your grandfather was born. Has treaty protection." "Treaties," Lem spat. "Don't mean much these days, Chief." "Neither do threats," Taza replied. He kneed his horse forward, not aggressive but not yielding either. After a tense moment, the pikes separated, letting them pass. "This ain't over," Jake called after them. Marian's hands shook slightly as they descended toward home. "They'll tell Crowell?" "Yes. He'll use it against me, say I'm harboring renegades or some such." Taza glanced at her. "Am I welcome on your land?" "Of course." "Then let him talk." In town that afternoon, the talking had already started. Marian felt the weight of stares as she entered Morrison's store. Conversations dropped to whispers. Clara Morrison's daughter, Emma, was behind the counter this time, a small mercy, as the girl had always been kinder than her mother. "Miss Hale." Emma greeted her. though her eyes darted nervously. "What can I help you with?" "I need lumber prices, and grain, if you have any." Emma fetched the ledger, quoting prices that made Marion wince. Everything had gone up since the railroad troubles back east. As she calculated what she could afford, the bell above the door chimed. Nora Finch swept in, all bustling energy and keen eyes. The boarding house keeper ruled Dry Creek's gossip network like a benevolent or not-so-benevolent queen. "Marion Hale, as I live and breathe, heard you had some trouble out your way." "Fire destroyed the hay barn," Marion confirmed, keeping her tone neutral. "Lightning, was it?" Nora's expression suggested she knew better. "Strange, with no storm. Course, stranger things have happened, like that Apache man helping with your horses. War hero. From what I hear, saved a whole cavalry unit from ambush back in '82. Marion tried not to show surprise. Where had Nora heard that? "Not that everyone appreciates such things," Nora continued, her voice carrying to the other customers. "Some folks got short memories when it suits them. That man served this territory better than most. Shame how they treated him after." An uncomfortable silence fell over the store. Marion seized the opportunity to complete her purchases and escape, but Nora followed her out. "You walk careful, girl," the older woman said, her gossip mask dropping. "Crowell's been making noise about protecting the town's virtue. Load of nonsense, but people listen when money talks." "Why are you telling me this?" Nora's face softened. "Your mother lent me $50 when my Robert died. Never asked for interest, never pressed when I was slow paying back. I remember kindness, Miss Hale, and I know a setup when I see one." Deputy Eli Carter was waiting by Marion's wagon, trying to look casual. "Miss Hale, heard there was some trouble on the mountain trail today. The Pikes made threats, nothing more." "About that?" Eli shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff wanted me to remind you that harboring hostile Indians is a federal offense." "Taza's not hostile. He's employed as my ranch hand." "Can you prove that work papers references? Since when do we need papers to hire help?" Since Crowell started worrying about property values. Eli had the grace to look ashamed. "Look, I'm just delivering the message, but maybe it'd be better if your friend stayed out of town for a while. Maybe the Pikes should stay off public trails." "Maybe?" Eli touched his hat. "You know Crowell's got a judge coming through next week's circuit court. He's filing papers about your mother's debt." "Let him file." Though her stomach clenched at the news, "The debt's not valid." "Yeah, can you prove that?" She couldn't, and they both knew it. Her mother, dying and desperate, hadn't read what she'd signed. Marion had only Crowell's copy, with its labyrinthine legal language. Back at the ranch, she found Taza working with her most difficult mare, the one who'd never let anyone but Marion's mother near her. The horse stood calm as he ran hands over her legs, checking for heat or swelling. "How?" Marion asked, genuinely amazed. Listened to her. She said where it hurt. He showed Marion a small cut, barely visible, already going septic. Needs drawing salve. They worked together treating the wound, Taza showing her how to pack it with a poultice of plants he'd gathered. His hands moved with the same careful precision whether he was building or healing. "Eli says you saved a cavalry unit," she ventured as they worked. His hand stilled briefly. "They say many things." "Is it true?" "Dead men can't argue stories." He finished wrapping the mare's leg. "I knew the land. They didn't. Simple." But she heard the weight beneath those simple words. Whatever had happened, it hadn't ended well for him. That night, she brought out her mother's medical books and journals. She wrote down everything, treatments, remedies, what worked and what didn't. Maybe something here could help. Taza accepted the books with visible surprise. They sat by lamplight as he turned pages, occasionally asking her to read a passage aloud. His spoken English was functional, but reading was clearly harder. "This one." He pointed to a drawing of a plant. Your mother drew this. Yes, she said someone taught her about it, for fever. My grandmother, old medicine. He studied the careful notes in the margins. Your mother saw what others missed. That plant, whites usually think it's just weed. They fell into a pattern over the following days, building by day, sharing knowledge by evening. Taza taught her survival skills, how to find water by watching birds, which cactus fruits were safe, how to read weather and the movement of ants. She helped him with written English, practical things like bills of sale and feed orders. Neither acknowledged the growing ease between them, the way they'd learned to work in companionable silence. Neither mentioned how Taza had stopped talking about leaving once the barn was finished. But the town noticed when Marion rode in for supplies. The whispers followed her like tumbleweeds. That Apache, living rough. What would her poor mother think? No wonder no decent man would court her. She held her head high, completed her business, ignored the talk. But late at night, counting days until Crowell's deadline, she wondered if she was fighting a battle already lost. Then came the morning she found Taza carving something in the shade of the new barn walls. The frame stood complete now, solid and true. He worked with focused concentration, wood curls falling around his feet. "What is it?" she asked. He held up the piece of currycomb with a handle shaped like a horse's head. Delicate work from rough wood. For grooming, the pattern helps blood flow, keeps coat healthy. She took it wonderingly. Her father had owned something similar, store-bought from back east. This was better balanced perfectly in her hand, each curve considered. Why? He went back to his carving. You needed one. Such a simple answer for something that must have taken hours. She wanted to say more, but didn't trust her voice. Instead, she fetched Buttercup and began grooming her with the new comb. The mare leaned into the pressure, clearly approving. From the corner of her eye, she saw Taza watching. When she smiled her thanks, something shifted in his expression there and gone like cloud shadow on stone. But she'd seen it, that flicker of warmth breaking through his careful reserve. That evening, Eli rode out with official-looking papers. "Summons," he said apologetically. "You're required to appear before Judge Thornfield next week regarding the debt. Crowell's also filing an injunction about water rights. Claims you're exceeding your usage." "That's absurd. We've used the same water for 20 years. New survey says different. Shows your springs on his property line." "What survey when?" Eli shrugged helplessly. "Last month, apparently. Look, I'll testify about the original boundary markers if it helps. But Crowell's got 2 surveyors backing his claim." After Eli left, Marion stood staring at the papers until Taza gently took them from her shaking hands. "We need proof," she said. "The old Spanish grant markers. Something. Mother always said the original survey was carved in stone up at Eagle's Rest. I know the place. 2 days' ride through rough country. Then we go, both of us." She met his eyes steadily. "I can't do this alone anymore." He nodded slowly. "We go." That night, she lay awake planning. Food, water, gear for mountain weather. The risk of leaving the ranch unguarded. The greater risk of losing everything if she couldn't prove her water rights. Outside, she heard Taza working on something. The rhythmic scrape of knife on wood. Standing at her window, she watched him in the moonlight, creating something beautiful from nothing, the way he'd helped her rebuild from ashes. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt something besides fear and exhaustion. It was dangerous, this feeling. Hope had a way of making losses hurt worse. But as she watched him work, patient and steady as the mountains themselves, she couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't going to face this fight alone. They left before dawn, when the desert air still held yesterday's coolness. Marion had spent the night preparing wrapping dried meat in oilcloth, filling canteens, checking her father's old maps against Taza's knowledge of the mountains. She'd left Tom Avery's eldest boy to watch the horses, paying him with the last of her saved coins. Storms building. Taza observed as they rode north, studying clouds massing over the peaks. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. She followed his gaze to where lightning flickered silent in the distance. Will it slow us down? Depends. He adjusted the rifle across his saddle. Sometimes storms open paths, sometimes they close them. They climbed steadily through the morning, leaving the desert floor for the intermediate zone where juniper gave way to ponderosa pine. The air thinned and sweetened with resin. Marian found herself breathing deeper, as if she could store this cleanness against the dust of the valley. By noon, they'd reached the old Spanish road, barely more than a trace through the forest. Stone cairns marked the way at intervals, some toppled by time or weather. Taza dismounted at one, studying the rocks with careful attention. "What do you see?" Marian asked. He showed her faint chisel marks on one stone. "Spanish made these, but look." His finger traced older marks beneath. "These were here first, Apache trail markers. Spanish built on what existed. Like everything in this territory," she thought, layers upon layers of claims and counterclaims, each generation believing their marks permanent. They ate a cold meal in the saddle, not wanting to lose daylight. The trail grew rougher, forcing them to lead the horses through sections where erosion had carved deep gullies. Taza moved with the sure-footedness of someone raised in these mountains, often reaching back to steady her when loose rocks shifted. "You know this trail well," she observed during one such moment, accepting his hand without the awkwardness she might have felt weeks ago. "Hunted here as a boy, before the boundaries changed." His voice carried no bitterness, just fact. "My uncle said the mountains don't recognize paper treaties. Do you miss it, that life?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Miss parts, the belonging, knowing where you fit." He helped her across a washout. "But that world's gone. Can't miss what doesn't exist." They pushed harder as afternoon waned, both feeling urgency they couldn't name. The storm was moving faster than expected, already darkening the western sky. Wind gusted through the pines, setting them whispering warnings. "There!" Taza pointed ahead where the trail forked. "Eagle's Rest is up the left path. 2 hours, maybe less if we hurry." But hurrying proved impossible. The left fork deteriorated into a series of switchbacks clinging to a steep mountainside. One side rose in sheer rock, the other dropped into a canyon so deep its bottom lay in shadow. The horses picked their way nervously, sensing their riders' tension. Thunder rumbled closer. The first fat raindrops spattered down, bringing the sharp scent of wet stone. Within minutes, the sprinkle became a downpour. The trail, already treacherous, turned to streaming mud. "We need shelter," Taza called over the storm's roar. Lightning cracked overhead. So close Marian tasted copper. Buttercup shied, her hooves sliding toward the edge. Marian threw her weight forward, fighting to keep the mare from panicking. "Easy, easy, girl." The trail crumbled beneath Buttercup's hind legs. For a terrifying moment, horse and rider teetered on the brink. Then Taza was there, grabbing the bridle, his own mount's superior footing giving him leverage to pull them back from the edge. "Cave ahead," he shouted. "Old mine shaft. Come on." They struggled forward through sheets of rain, the horses wild-eyed but trusting their riders. The cave mouth appeared like a miracle, a horizontal shaft cut into the cliff face. Probably an old prospect hole from the territory's first mining boom. Inside, they stood dripping and gasping while the storm raged beyond the entrance. The shaft extended back into darkness, but the front chamber was dry and large enough for humans and horses both. That was close, Marian managed, her hands still shaking. Taza was already checking the horses for injury, running experienced hands over legs and hooves. "Your mare's got a cut, not deep, but needs cleaning." They worked together by lamplight, tending the animals first. Only when the horses were settled did they think of themselves soaked clothes. The dropping temperature, the hours until dawn. "Fire?" Marian asked through chattering teeth. Taza shook his head. Smoke would show for miles, but here he'd been exploring while she wrung out her hair. Now he led her deeper into the cave where someone, decades ago, had left a cache of supplies. Moth-eaten blankets, rusted tools, even sealed tins that might hold food. Prospectors, he explained. They'd leave supplies for winter, come back in spring. This one never came back. The blankets smelled of age and mice, but were dry. They each took one, settling against opposite walls of the narrow space. Outside, thunder crashed like artillery. Water streamed past the cave mouth in a temporary waterfall. "Thank you," Marion said into the darkness, "for saving us back there. You'd have managed." "No, I wouldn't." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I'm good with horses on flat ground. This—" She gestured at the cave, the storm, the wilderness beyond. "This is your world?" "Our world now." The simple statement hung between them. In the lamplight, she could see his profile, sharp planes and angles, but his expression softer than she'd seen it. "Tell me about your family," she said, surprising herself. "Your sister, who my mother helped." He was quiet long enough she regretted asking. "Then, little bird, we called her, curious about everything, always asking why the sky was blue, why water ran downhill." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She wanted to learn white medicine, mix it with our ways, said there had to be good in both. What happened to her? Fever took her anyway. Medicine couldn't fight it, white or Apache." He shifted, his voice dropping. "I was scouting for the army then. Came back to bury her. My mother said it was punishment for helping whites. Maybe she was right." "You don't believe that." "Don't I?" He looked at her directly. "Good people die. Bad ones prosper. Where's the logic in that?" She thought of her mother, fighting for breath in those final days. "Maybe there isn't any. Maybe we just do what we can with what we have." Your mother believed that, saw it in how she worked, no judgment, just healing where she could. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the storm's fury gradually spent. Marion dozed despite herself, jerking awake when thunder crashed particularly close. Each time, she found Taza watchful, alert to dangers she couldn't imagine. "Sleep," he said finally. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too." "Used to less sleep." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. Curled in the musty blanket, she let the storm's white noise lull her. Her last conscious thought was how strange it felt to trust someone else to guard her sleep. Dawn came gray and dripping. The storm had passed, leaving a transformed landscape. The trail they'd climbed was gone in places, washed out by flash flooding. But Taza found another route, longer but passable. "You know these mountains like a book," Marion observed as they picked their way through new fallen rocks. "Better than books. Books can lie. Land always tells truth, if you know how to read it." They reached Eagle's Rest by mid-morning, a flat shoulder of rock with commanding views of 3 valleys. Ancient pines grew twisted by centuries of wind, and there, exactly where her mother had said, stood a boundary marker. It was older than Marion had imagined. Spanish letters carved deep into granite, filled with lead to survive the seasons. The inscription was partly in Latin, partly in Spanish, but the meaning was clear water rights to the spring and its runoff, granted in perpetuity to whoever held the valley grant. "This proves it," she breathed. "The water's mine by right, has been since before Crowell was born." But Taza was examining the stone with a frown. "Look here." Fresh chisel marks scarred one corner. Someone had tried to alter the inscription, adding lines that would shift the boundary. The work was recent, but made to look old. "Crowell's surveyors," Marion said bitterly. "They've been up here, but they failed." Taza traced the original carving. "Stone's too hard. Their marks are shallow. Anyone who knows stone can see the difference. He was already pulling out his knife, not to carve, but to take a rubbing, using paper from Marion's journal and charcoal from an old fire pit. He created a clear impression of the original inscription. "Evidence," he said, handing it to her. "But we need more. Need someone who can read the old Spanish. Testify what it means." Father Miguel at the mission. He studied the old grants. They spent another hour documenting the marker from every angle. Marion sketching while Taza took measurements. The sun broke through dissipating clouds, turning the wet rocks to gems. "My mother stood here," Marion said suddenly. "Probably my grandmother, too. All the women who fought to hold on to this land." Strong line. Taza agreed. "Like this stone, weathered but not broken." The return journey took a different route, Taza leading them down the mountain's eastern face to avoid the washed-out trail. They descended through aspen groves where leaves whispered secrets, past meadows where elk grazed in bachelor groups. At one point, they stopped to rest the horses by a clear-running creek. Marion knelt to refill canteens, gasping at the water's cold bite. When she looked up, Taza was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" "You're different here, in the mountains." He seemed to search for words. "More. Yourself." She considered this. "I feel different, like I can breathe." She gestured at the endless forest. "No one watching, no one judging." "Is that what town feels like, always watched?" "You don't feel it." His smile was rueful. "I'm Apache. I'm always watched." They rode in comfortable silence after that. But Marion found herself stealing glances at him, the way he sat his horse like he'd been born to it, how his hands stayed gentle on the reins despite their strength, the patience in his teaching, never making her feel foolish for what she didn't know. Dangerous thoughts for a woman in her position, but here, miles from anywhere. She let herself think them. They reached familiar territory as afternoon shadows grew long. The horses, sensing home, picked up their pace, but as they crested the last rise before the ranch, both riders pulled up short. Fresh wagon tracks scarred the road, several sets heavy-loaded, and there smoke rising from the direction of her property. Not the black smoke of destruction, but the gray haze of cook fires. "Company," Taza said grimly. They approached cautiously, using cover. Through the remaining barn walls, Marion could see men, Pike brothers. Sure enough, but others too. They'd set up camp on her land like they owned it. "What do we do?" she whispered. Taza studied the scene with a scout's eye. "How much do you trust that deputy?" "Eli, he's decent, just caught between—" "Get him! Tell him armed men are trespassing. I'll watch from here." She didn't want to leave him, but she recognized the wisdom. If she rode in alone, it would look like she'd simply been to town if they arrived together. "Be careful," she said. "You too." She circled wide, approaching from the south as if coming from town. The Pike spotted her immediately, Lem standing with insolent slowness. "Miss Hale, been wondering where you got to." "This is my land. You're trespassing." "Now, that's where you're wrong." Jake produced a paper with official-looking seals. Mr. Crowell's obtained a preliminary injunction. Until the court rules on water rights, this land's under territorial supervision. We're here to make sure you don't destroy evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Illegal water diversion. Survey team will be here tomorrow to document your violations." Rage rose in her throat, but she forced it down. "I want to see Deputy Carter, now!" "He's in town, but you're welcome to fetch him." Lem's smile was ugly. "Course, we'll need to search your bags first. Make sure you're not removing evidence." She submitted to the humiliation, knowing Taza was watching, trusting him to stay hidden. They pawed through her saddlebags, finding only trail supplies and her journal. Jake flipped through it with dirty fingers. "Lots of writing about that Apache," he noted. "Interesting reading." She snatched it back. "I'll return with the deputy." "You do that. Oh, And Miss Hale, that Apache shows his face here. We got orders to arrest him. Suspicion of horse theft." She rode away with their laughter following, her back rigid with fury. But beneath the anger ran a deeper current of fear. They were closing in, using the law itself as a weapon. In town, she found Eli at the jail, feet up on his desk. He came alert when she burst in. "Armed men on my property, pikes and others. They claim to have an injunction." "They do." Eli looked miserable. "Judge Thornfield issued it yesterday. Crowell presented evidence of survey irregularities." "What evidence? We haven't even had the hearing yet." "I know, but he's got sworn statements from 2 surveyors. Judge felt the potential damage warranted immediate action." He stood, reaching for his hat. "I'll come out. Make sure they stay civil. But Miss Hale, there's not much I can do." They rode back together, Eli filling her in on the legal maneuvering. Crowell had filed multiple claims: the debt, the water rights, now accusations of theft regarding horses sold without clear title. "He's throwing everything at once," Eli explained, "hoping something sticks, or hoping I'll give up." "That too." At the ranch, Eli did his best. He made the Pikes move their camp to the edge of the property, warned them against damaging anything, but his authority was limited, and everyone knew it. As darkness fell, Marion sat on her porch, wondering where Taza was. The Pikes had posted guards, making it dangerous for him to approach. She felt his absence like a missing limb. Near midnight, a pebble struck her window. She found him in the shadows by the chicken coop, having somehow ghosted past the guards. "Are you insane?" she whispered. "If they catch you." "Needed to know you were safe." He pressed something into her hand, another rubbing from the stone marker. This one clearer. "Keep this hidden. Tomorrow, when they search, I'll make sure they find the first one. Let them think that's all we have." "Where will you go?" "Close. These men are city fighters. They watch the obvious places." He touched her hand briefly. "When you see Father Miguel, tell him about the Latin inscription. He'll understand its importance." Then he was gone, melting into darkness like smoke. Marion stood there, heart pounding, the paper clutched in her hand. In the cook fire's distant light, she saw the Pikes laughing over a bottle. They thought they'd won, but they didn't know about mountain storms and carved stones. They didn't know about the carefully documented evidence hidden in her mother's journal. Most of all, they didn't know about the man who moved through darkness like he was born to it, who'd stood with her against storm and stone. The game wasn't over. It had barely begun. The survey team arrived at dawn. 3 men with theodolites and chains who went about their work with the mechanical precision of those who'd already decided their findings. Marion watched from her porch as they measured and marked, occasionally conferring over maps that looked suspiciously new. Miss Hale, the lead surveyor, a thin man named Hartley, approached with false politeness. "We'll need to inspect your water diversion systems." "What diversions? We use the same creek channel my family's used for 30 years. "That's what we're here to determine." He made notes on his pad. "Any alterations to the natural flow constitute illegal appropriation under territorial law." She knew arguing was futile. Instead, she shadowed them, noting every measurement, every mark they made. When they weren't looking, she sketched their positions in her journal, creating her own record. Near noon, a commotion arose from the north pasture. Jake Pike came riding hard, dragging something behind his horse, one of her yearlings, roped and fighting. "Found this one running branded on federal land," he announced loudly. "No bill of sale in your records for this brand modification." Marion's temper flared. "That's my mother's brand, registered in 71. The modification was recorded when I inherited." "Funny, we can't find that record." Lem Pike produced a ledger. "According to the territorial registry, this brand belongs to the Crowell Mining Company." It was a lie so blatant she could only stare, but Hartley dutifully recorded it. adding notes about disputed livestock to his growing report. By afternoon, she'd had enough. "I'm going to town," she announced, "to file a complaint with the sheriff." "Of course," Lem smiled. "Though you might want to hurry. Judge Thornfield's leaving on the evening stage. Won't be another circuit judge for 2 months." She saddled Buttercup with shaking hands. 2 months. By then, Crowell would have manufactured enough evidence to take everything. In town, she went first to Father Miguel's mission. The elderly priest received her in his study, surrounded by books and documents dating back to Spanish rule. "The Eagle's Rest marker," she said without preamble, showing him the rubbing. "Can you translate it?" His eyes widened as he studied the marks. "Mia, this is from the original Peralto grant. Very old, very specific." He pulled down a leather-bound volume, comparing text. "Yes, here. The waters arising from the Eagle's sacred stone shall flow forever to those who hold the valley patent. Your mother's land, without question. Will you testify to that?" He hesitated. "Crowell contributes generously to the mission." "Father, please." "I will pray on it," which she knew meant he was afraid. She couldn't blame him. At the courthouse, she found chaos. The small building overflowed with people filing claims and counterclaims. Judge Thornfield, a skeletal man with dyspeptic eyes, processed them with assembly line efficiency. 5 minutes, his clerk told her. "State your business quickly." She laid out her case as clearly as she could: the false survey, the planted evidence, the harassment. Thornfield barely looked up from his papers. "Do you have documentation supporting your claims?" "I have the original marker. Father Miguel can verify." "Not testimony. Documents, deeds, surveys, official records." "Those are being fabricated as we speak." "That's a serious accusation. Miss Hale, can you prove it?" She wanted to scream. How could she prove men were lying when they controlled the very records that would expose them? "I thought not." Thornfield stamped something. "The preliminary injunction stands. You have 7 days to produce documentation or vacate the disputed land pending final adjudication."
7 days, but you won't even be here."
That's all. She was dismissed like a beggar. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Barton Crowell himself, dressed in his finest suit. "Miss Hale, how fortunate." His smile was a predator's. "I've been thinking about our situation. Perhaps we could resolve this amicably." "There's nothing to resolve. The land is mine." "The courts seem to disagree, but I'm not an unreasonable man. Marry me, and this all goes away. The debts, the disputes, everything. You keep your ranch, gain a prosperous husband, everyone wins." The proposal was so absurd she almost laughed. "I'd rather lose everything." "You will." His mask slipped, showing the cruel calculation beneath. "Either way, I'll have that land. The question is whether you'll be my wife or just another failed homesteader. Choose wisely." She left without responding, but his threat followed her into the street. At the livery stable, she found an unexpected ally. Sam Bauer, the hostler, pulled her aside. "Miss Hale, that Apache friend of yours left something." He produced a wrapped bundle. "Said you'd know what to do with it." Inside was her mother's brand iron and a note in Taza's careful writing. "True iron leaves true marks. Check the yearlings close." She didn't understand until she reached the stock pens where the disputed horses were being held, using the excuse of checking their condition. She examined the brands carefully. There, what she'd missed before. The Crowell brand was fresh, burned over her mother's mark, but not deeply enough to hide the original. "Eli," she found the deputy at his usual post. "I need you to see something. Now!" He followed, reluctantly, clearly wishing to be elsewhere. But when she showed him the double brands, his expression changed. That's brand alteration. Serious crime. Will you arrest them?" "For following Crowell's orders, Miss Hale. I'd need more than... A disturbance interrupted them. Horses thundering down Main Street, townsfolk scattering. 3 riders, Taza in the lead, pursued by the Pike brothers. "There!" Jake Pike shouted. "The horse thief!" Taza's mount one of Marion's horses, she realized, moved like water through the obstacles of wagons and pedestrians. He could have escaped easily, but instead he turned toward the stock pens, leading his pursuers exactly where Marion and Eli stood.
That's my horse,
Jake yelled, sliding from his saddle.
Caught him red-handed.
"This horse," Taza dismounted calmly. "Check the brand." "Don't need to. I know my stock." "Check it," Eli said quietly. Jake bent to look, confident. His expression changed as he saw what Marion had found fresh burns over old. Crowell's mark trying to hide her mother's. "Frame job's harder than you thought," Taza observed. "Takes skill to alter brands proper. You don't have it." Lem Pike's hand moved toward his gun.
"You calling us liars? Indian."
"No need. Brands speak for themselves." The crowd was growing, drawn by conflict. Among them, Marion spotted Nora Finch, her boarding house guests, even some of Crowell's own miners. Witnesses. "This proves nothing," Lem blustered. "Could have been done by anyone." "True," Eli said slowly. "But it raises questions. Think I better impound all these horses until we sort it out." He looked at Marion. "You'll need to provide your registration papers." "Of course." She felt a spark of hope. "They're in my mother's records, filed with the territorial office in '71. "Those records burned in the fire of 87 inches, Jake said quickly. Too quickly. "How would you know that?" Nora Finch asked loudly. "Unless you'd been looking for them specifically," the crowd murmured. Doubt was spreading like ripples in water. That evening, back at the ranch, Marion found the survey team packing up. Hartley looked uncomfortable as he approached. "We've completed our initial assessment," he said formally. "There are irregularities that require further investigation." "Irregularities in whose favor?" He glanced around nervously. "I'm not at liberty to say, but I would advise, that is, if you had any additional documentation, now would be the time to produce it." After they left, she sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson. Taza appeared from wherever he'd been hiding, moving silently across the yard. "That was dangerous," she said, "leading them to town like that." "Needed witnesses. Needed them to show their hand." He settled beside her, careful to maintain proper distance. "Your deputy did better than expected." "Eli tries, but trying isn't enough. Not against Crowell's money." They sat in companionable silence, watching bats emerge for their evening hunt. The temporary camp at the property's edge showed lights and movement, but for now the watchers kept their distance. "I found something else," Taza said eventually. He produced a leather portfolio. "In town, records office." Inside were copies of mining claims, water appropriations, surveys all filed by Crowell over the past year, all describing parcels that surrounded her land like a noose. "He's been planning this," she breathed. "All of it. My mother's debt was just the excuse. More than that," Taza pointed to specific claims. "These overlap federal grazing lands, Apache treaty lands too. He's claiming what's not his to claim. Then we can fight." "With what judge, what law?" His voice carried old bitterness. "Treaties broken before ink dried. Federal land given to whoever pays most." "So we just give up?" "No." He looked at her directly. "We make our own proof. Tomorrow's the stock sale. Every rancher in 50 miles will be there. We show them the altered brands, make them question what else Crowell's lied about." It was a risk. Public accusation could backfire spectacularly. But what choice did they have? That night, she barely slept. Plans and contingencies raced through her mind. At dawn, she rose to find Taza already preparing not just her horses for the sale, But evidence? He'd created a display showing the brand alterations, the overlapping claims, the inconsistencies in Crowell's paperwork.
"You've been busy,"
she observed. Learned from Army reports. Make truth visible. Harder to deny. They loaded everything carefully, aware of watching eyes. The Pike brothers made no attempt to stop them, probably under orders to avoid public confrontation. The stock sale grounds buzzed with activity. Ranchers from across the territory had brought their best animals, hoping for good prices before winter. Marion sat up in her usual spot, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Word spread quickly about the brand dispute. Ranchers drifted over, examining Taza's display with professional interest. Old Sam Murdoch, who'd known her mother, shook his head.
"That's Catherine's iron. Sure enough. Remember when she registered it? Same day as my own Circle M."
Others nodded agreement. The physical evidence was compelling in a way legal documents weren't. These men knew brands like they knew their own children's faces. Crowell arrived near midday, flanked by hired guns. His expression darkened as he saw the crowd around Marion's display.
"Spreading lies, Miss Hale?" he asked loudly.
"Showing truth, Mr. Crowell," she replied evenly. "Something you might not recognize. Truth is what the law says it is, and the law says brand alteration's a hanging offense." Old Murdoch interrupted. "Always has been. You claiming different?" The crowd shifted. No longer neutral observers. Ranchers had their own code, and brand theft violated its most sacred tenet. Crowell's smile turned sharp. "Interesting theory. Of course, if we're discussing legal matters." He produced a document with official seals. "This is a witnessed certificate of matrimonial intent, signed by Miss Hale."
"That's a lie!"
Marion snatched for it, but he held it high. "Your signature's right there, promising to marry me in exchange for debt relief. Breach of promise is actionable in court." She saw her name at the bottom, perfectly forged. The crowd murmured, confused now, sympathies divided.
"If she signed it," Nora Finch's voice cut through clearly, "why is she only seeing it now? Any real promise would have her keeping a copy."
"Perhaps she destroyed it. Shameful behavior."
"I was with Miss Hale the night that's dated," Nora continued. "She was tending her mother, who was dying. I sat vigil with them. Unless she can be two places at once, that signature's false as fool's gold."
The crowd turned again, murmuring, growing hostile. Crowell's men fingered their weapons nervously. Then Taza stepped forward, and everything stilled. "You want to talk about law?" His voice carried surprising authority. "Federal law prohibits fraudulent claim jumping on treaty lands. Penalties 5 years hard labor."
"You threatening me, Apache?"
"Stating facts." Taza produced another document. "Mining claim 47B, filed by you. Overlaps treaty-guaranteed Apache grazing grounds by 300 acres. Treaties with savages." The word hung in the air like a spark near powder. Several ranchers stepped back, hands moving to weapons, but Taza remained perfectly still, only his eyes showing the controlled fury within. "Finish that thought," he said quietly. "Tell these men what you think of treaties, of laws, of anything that stands between you and what you want." Crowell's control finally snapped. "I'll have that land, and no jumped-up Indian or stubborn woman will stop me. I've paid judges, bought witnesses, own half this territory's debts. What I want, I take E." The silence that followed was deafening. Even his own men looked uncomfortable. In one furious moment, he'd confirmed every suspicion, every doubt. "Well," Judge Thornfield's dry voice came from behind the crowd. "That was remarkably illuminating." Everyone turned. The judge stood with Father Miguel and, surprisingly, the territorial marshal who wasn't due for another month. Came back when Father Miguel sent word about irregular proceedings. Thornfield continued. "Marshal Richards was kind enough to accompany me. I believe we have some matters to review." What followed was swift. The marshal's men secured the altered horses. Witnesses came forward, not just Nora, but the surveyor Hartley, admitting he'd been pressured to falsify findings. Father Miguel presented his translation of the boundary stone. Crowell tried to bluster, to bribe, to threaten, but momentum had shifted. By evening, he was under arrest for fraud, his hired men scattered like quail. "It's not over," Eli warned Marion as Crowell was led away. "He'll make bail, hire lawyers. This could drag on for years." "Maybe," she agreed. "But now it'll drag on in real courts, with real evidence." As the crowd dispersed, she found Taza loading the horses for the journey home. He worked steadily, not meeting her eyes. "That was brave," she said, "standing up in front of everyone." "Necessary." "Still," she touched his arm lightly. "Thank you." He finally looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "Your mother stood for my people once, debt repaid." Is that all it was, a debt? The question hung between them as complex as the fading light. He didn't answer directly, but when he helped her mount Buttercup, his hands lingered a moment longer than necessary. They rode home through gathering dusk, the Pikes' abandoned camp dark beside the road. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, lawyers, hearings, the slow grind of justice. But tonight, for the first time in months, Marion felt she could breathe. "Will you stay?" she asked as they unsaddled the horses. "Through whatever comes next." Taza considered the question, looking out at the land they'd fought to preserve. "Where would I go, work's not finished?" "The barn." "The barn," he agreed, but they both knew he meant more than construction. That night, she saw him working late by lantern light, not on the barn, but on something smaller, more intricate. Another carving, she guessed, though she couldn't make out what. From her window, she watched him work, patient and precise as always. Tomorrow they'd face whatever Crowell's money could buy, but tonight, on her own land, with an ally who'd proven himself in fire and conflict, she allowed herself something dangerous. She allowed herself to hope. The night before the hearing fell cold and clear, with stars scattered like silver dust across the desert sky. Marion couldn't sleep, her mind churning over the next day's possibilities. She wrapped her mother's shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch, seeking peace in the familiar darkness. A soft sound drew her attention, the rhythmic scrape of knife on wood. She found Taza in the lean-to, working by the light of a single candle. Her coat lay across his lap, and he was carefully mending a tear in the sleeve she hadn't even noticed. "You should rest," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, his hands never pausing in their work. "Couldn't sleep either." She settled on a crate nearby, watching his careful stitches. "I keep thinking about tomorrow. What if the judge doesn't believe us? What if Crowell's lawyers—" "Tomorrow will come regardless. Worry doesn't change it." "How can you be so calm?" He set down the needle, considering, not calm, just learned that fear uses energy better spent on doing. She noticed then that his hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from old pain. The way he moved his shoulder told her the bone aches were bad tonight. "Your injuries," she said, "from the war." "Some, others from after." He resumed sewing. "Soldiers I saved didn't always remember, and Apache helped them. Easier to forget. Sometimes." Without thinking, she reached out and touched the scar that ran along his forearm. He went very still, but didn't pull away. "Does it hurt?" "Always, but pain reminds us we survived." Her fingers traced the mark gently. She could feel his pulse beneath the skin, steady and strong. When she looked up, his eyes were on her face, dark and unreadable in the candlelight. "Marion!" Just her name, but the way he said it made her breath catch. "I know," she whispered. "I know all the reasons this is impossible. You're Apache. I'm white. The town already whispers.
Crowell will use it against us.
All true.
His free hand covered hers, warm and calloused. Still here?
Why?
He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. My grandmother used to say the heart recognizes what the mind denies. Said love was like water finds its way through any stone. Is that what this is? The question came out barely audible. Instead of answering directly, he lifted her hand and placed it over his heart. Through the worn fabric of his shirt, she felt its rhythm faster than usual but steady, reliable. Nobody desired to be his wife, she murmured, echoing the cruel whispers she'd heard in town. Then, meeting his eyes, she continued with fierce certainty, until she realized the mountain Apache's heart beat softly for love. Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to wonder. Then something deeper. He cradled her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. Is that what you've realized? Yes. No hesitation now. Your heart beats with such kindness, such strength. How could I not? He kissed her then, soft as mountain mist, careful as if she might break. She leaned into him, feeling the tremor that ran through his body, understanding it matched her own. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers, breathing unsteadily. This changes things, makes them harder. I know. Town will be cruel. Your own people might turn away. They already have. Crowell will. Taza. She placed her fingers over his lips. I've lost my mother, might lose my land, but finding you, finding this, I won't lose it to fear. He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. In the candlelight, she saw his eyes were bright with unshed tears. My people have a ceremony, he said roughly. When two hearts decide to beat as one, not marriage as whites know it, but a promising. Tell me. He described it quietly, the exchange of gifts made by their own hands. Words spoken under sky and stars. The blessing of an elder if one could be found. Simple, honest. Nothing like the elaborate church weddings in town. After tomorrow, she said. After we know what the judge decides. If I still have land to offer you. Not about land. His voice turned fierce. If you had nothing but the clothes you wear, I would still choose this. She kissed him again, tasting promise on his lips. They stayed close in the candlelight, her head on his shoulder, his arms careful around her, not going further, both understanding this wasn't the time, that what grew between them deserved patience, deserved honor. I should go, she finally murmured against his neck. Dawn comes early. Yes, but he held her a moment longer, his lips brushing her hair. Whatever tomorrow brings, remember this. You're not alone, not anymore. She carried that warmth back to her cold bed, wrapping it around her like armor against the coming storm. Morning arrived gray and dusty, the wind already picking up. Marion dressed carefully in her best dress, mended but clean, pressed with her mother's old iron. When she emerged, she found Taza waiting with the horses, dressed in his own finest, a mix of traditional Apache and frontier clothing that somehow looked exactly right. Ready? He asked. No, but let's go anyway. The ride to town felt both endless and too quick. People stared as they passed, some with curiosity, others with disapproval. Marion kept her head high, drawing strength from Taza's steady presence beside her. The courthouse overflowed with spectators. Word had spread about the confrontation at the stock sale, and everyone wanted to witness the outcome. Marion saw friendly faces, Nora, Father Miguel, some of the ranchers who'd supported her. But Crowell's people were there too, a sea of hired suits and hard faces. Crowell himself sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 3 lawyers from the territorial capital. He'd made bail immediately, of course, and now looked as pompous as ever in his expensive suit. When he saw her, his smile was cold as winter frost. All rise for the Honorable Judge Thornfield. The bailiff called,
The proceedings began with mind-numbing legal arguments. Crowell's lawyers painted Marion as a desperate woman who'd manipulated an innocent businessman, using her feminine wiles and an Apache drifter to cloud the truth about legitimate debts. The defendant, lead counsel intoned, has shown a pattern of inappropriate associations and poor judgment that call into question her fitness to manage property. Marion's lawyer, a young man named Harrison, whom Father Miguel had found, objected vigorously, but damage was being done. She could feel the crowd's judgment like a physical weight. Then came witness testimony. The surveyors admitted their findings had been influenced, but stopped short of saying Crowell had ordered falsification. The brand inspector confirmed alterations but couldn't say who'd done them. Circumstantial. Crowell's lawyer dismissed. My client is a victim of sabotage, likely by the same Apache who's mysteriously appeared to help Miss Hale. When Taza was called to testify, the courtroom stirred with anticipation. He took the stand with dignity, ignoring the whispers and stares. State your name for the record, the clerk instructed. Taza, sometimes called Joseph Taza by the Army. You were a scout.
Yes.
And you now work for Miss Hale. I help with horses and building. She pays fair wages. Crowell's lawyer rose like a vulture scenting death. This court has heard testimony about your closeness with the defendant. Would you describe your relationship? Taza met the man's eyes steadily.
I work for Miss Hale. I respect her.
Nothing more. No personal interest that might color your testimony. Objection. Harrison called irrelevant to the matter of water rights and debt. Goes to credibility. The prosecutor countered. I'll allow it. Judge Thornfield decided. Taza was quiet for a moment. Then, with simple honesty that rang through the courtroom, Miss Hale showed kindness when others showed suspicion. If that colors my testimony, so be it, but I speak only truth. And what is your version of the truth? Taza laid out the facts methodically, the brand alterations, the forged documents, Crowell's own words at the stock sale. His testimony was clear, precise, backed by the physical evidence they'd gathered. The Apache are known for many things, Crowell's lawyer said silkily, including creative interpretations of ownership. How do we know you didn't alter these brands yourself? Because I know the penalty for brand theft. My people have been hanged for less. Taza's voice remained level, but Marion saw his knuckles whiten where he gripped the rail. I would not risk Miss Hale's reputation for any scheme. When Marion took the stand, she felt Taza's eyes on her, steady and encouraging. She testified about her mother's illness, the desperation that had driven her to accept Crowell's loan, the escalating harassment after her mother's death. Miss Hale. Crowell's lawyer approached with false sympathy. You've been under tremendous strain. Losing your mother, managing a ranch alone. It's understandable you might misremember certain agreements. I remember exactly what my mother signed, and I remember Mr. Crowell promising Christian charity while calculating interest rates that would shame a carpetbagger. Your emotional state. My emotional state is irrelevant to the fact that Mr. Crowell has been systematically falsifying documents to steal my land. The lawyer changed tactics. Let's discuss your relationship with the Apache. Objection! Harrison shot up. Overruled. Answer the question. Miss Hale. She lifted her chin. Taza has been invaluable help during a difficult time. He's honest, hard-working, and knowledgeable about horses and land management. Nothing more personal. The question hung in the air like smoke. Marion thought of last night, the warmth of his hands, the promise in his kiss. Then she thought of her mother, fighting for dignity even while dying. My personal feelings are my own business, she said clearly. What matters is that Mr. Crowell has committed fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. Whether I employ an Apache, a Chinaman, or the Emperor of Japan doesn't change those facts. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Even Judge Thornfield looked taken aback by her directness.
The hearing continued through the afternoon. Father Miguel testified about the boundary stone's inscription. Nora confirmed Marion's whereabouts the night of the supposed marriage promise. Even Eli, looking miserable but determined, testified about the suspicious timing of various claims and counterclaims. Finally, both sides rested. Judge Thornfield called a recess to review evidence. The wait felt eternal. Marion stood with Harrison on the courthouse steps, aware of the crowd's eyes, the whispers that followed her movement. "You did well," Harrison assured her. "The evidence is strong." But evidence wasn't everything. They both knew, not when money and influence weighed the scales. Taza stood apart, respecting the proprieties of the moment. But when her eyes found his, he touched his hand briefly to his heart, a reminder of promises made in candlelight. Courts resuming, someone called. Back inside, Judge Thornfield looked tired as he began his ruling. This case presents complex questions of law and fact. However, certain elements are clear. He reviewed the evidence methodically, the altered brands, the forged marriage promise, the overlapping land claims. With each point, Crowell's expression darkened. While Mr. Crowell's business practices may be aggressive, they do not appear to violate territorial law as written. The judge continued, and Marion's heart sank. However, that single word restored hope. The evidence of document falsification is compelling. More importantly, Mr. Crowell's own admission before witnesses that he would take what he wanted regardless of law shows clear criminal intent. The courtroom stirred. Crowell half rose before his lawyers pulled him down. Therefore, this court finds the debt instrument signed by Catherine Hale to be valid but obtained under duress. The amount owed will be reduced to principal, only no interest. Miss Hale will have 1 year to pay the $300 originally borrowed. $300, still a fortune, but manageable if she could sell horses at fair prices. Furthermore, all water rights claims filed by Mr. Crowell regarding the Hale property are dismissed with prejudice. The original Spanish grant boundaries stand. As for the criminal charges of fraud and forgery, Mr. Crowell will stand trial in territorial court. Bail is set at $5,000, cash only. Marshal Richards, please ensure Mr. Crowell doesn't leave the territory. The gavel fell with finality. Chaos erupted. Crowell's lawyers protested loudly while the marshal's men moved in. Spectators pushed forward, some congratulating Marion, others muttering about Apache influence and corrupted justice. Through it all, Marion stood stunned. They'd won. Not completely, the debt remained, but they'd won what mattered most. She found Taza outside, holding their horses. Without caring who saw, she grasped his hands. "We did it." "You did it," he corrected. Stood there brave as any warrior. "We," she insisted. "I couldn't have—" "Miss Hale." A reporter from the territorial newspaper pushed close. "How does it feel to win? What are your plans now?" She looked at Taza, saw her own joy reflected in his eyes despite his careful expression. What were her plans? To build her barn, to raise her horses, to explore this unexpected gift of love that had found her in the midst of loss. But all she said was, "I plan to go home and tend my animals. The rest, we'll see what tomorrow brings." As they rode home through the afternoon heat, she felt lighter than she had in months. Crowell wasn't finished. Men like him never gave up easily. There would be appeals, further harassment, continued challenges. But for today, she had her land. She had her freedom. And riding beside her, quiet and steady as the mountains themselves, she had something she'd never dared hope for. She had love, unexpected, complicated, but real as the heart beating softly in her chest. Tomorrow they would talk of ceremonies and promises, of building a life that defied convention. Tonight, she would simply be grateful for the man who'd stood with her against all odds, whose heart beat in rhythm with her own. The road home stretched before them, dusty and difficult.
But for the first time in memory, Marion looked forward to traveling it. The warehouse chosen for the trial sat on Main Street like a barn that had lost its way, hastily converted to accommodate the largest crowd Dry Creek had ever seen. 3 days had passed since Judge Thornfield's initial ruling, and Barton Crowell had made bail through mysterious benefactors back east. Now the territorial prosecutor had arrived for the criminal trial, and half of Arizona seemed determined to witness it. Marion arrived early with Taza, both understanding the importance of this day. If Crowell escaped justice now, he'd return stronger and more vindictive than ever.
"Packed already,"
Taza observed, studying the crowd flowing through the warehouse doors. "Everyone loves a spectacle." She smoothed her dress nervously. "And Crowell's made sure it will be one." Indeed, Crowell had hired the territory's most expensive legal team, 3 lawyers from Phoenix, who arrived on a special stage with trunks of law books and an air of urban superiority. They immediately began rearranging the makeshift courtroom, positioning their client where the morning light would fall favorably across his respectable merchant's attire. Miss Hale. Prosecutor Williams approached a harried-looking man who'd seemed overwhelmed since stepping off yesterday's stage. "I need to review your testimony once more. The defense is planning to attack your character extensively." "Let them," she said with more confidence than she felt. "They have witnesses, people willing to testify about your associations, your refusal of proper marriage offers, the Apache situation." Taza stiffened beside her, but Marion touched his arm lightly.
"The truth isn't something to fear, Mr.
Williams." As the warehouse filled, she recognized faces from across the territory. Ranchers, miners, merchants, even some Apache from the reservation who stood quietly at the back. The whole frontier had come to see justice tested. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Thornfield entered. The proceedings began with opening statements. Crowell's lead attorney, a silver-tongued man named Hutchinson, painted his client as a pillar of the community, brought low by a designing woman. "We will show," Hutchinson proclaimed, "that my client's only crime was extending Christian charity to a desperate family, only to be ensnared in a web of lies and manipulation." Williams, in contrast, stumbled through his opening, clearly intimidated by the opposition. Marion's heart sank as she watched him shuffle papers and lose his train of thought. Then the witnesses began. First came character witnesses for Crowell business associates who praised his generosity, civic leaders who spoke of his contributions to the town's growth. Each one carefully avoided mentioning the loans that bound them to him. "Mr. Crowell employed half this town during the mine expansion," testified Samuel Briggs, the assayer. "Without him, Dry Creek would be another ghost town." On cross-examination, Williams tried to pierce this facade but failed. He didn't know the right questions, didn't understand the web of debt and favors that made these men lie. Then came the attack on Marion. "I call Mrs. Dorothy Simmons," Hutchinson announced. Marion didn't recognize the prim woman who took the stand until she began speaking. Then she remembered the woman who'd snubbed her at church after the saloon incident. "Miss Hale has always been wild." "Mrs." Simmons testified with relish. "Even as a girl, riding astride like a man, refusing women's proper work. And after her mother passed, the way she took up with that Apache." "Objection," Williams called weakly. "Relevance." "Goes to the witness's credibility and moral character," Hutchinson argued smoothly. "I'll allow it," Thornfield ruled, though he looked uncomfortable. The character assassination continued. Merchants testified about Marion's aggressive bargaining. A traveling preacher spoke of her absence from Sunday services. Each witness painted her as an unnatural woman who'd brought her troubles on herself. When Taza's turn came to testify again, Hutchinson circled like a predator. "You fought for the Army, correct?" "Yes. Killed men in that service." "When necessary."
"How many?"
Taza's jaw tightened. "I didn't count." More than 10, 20, 50.
Objection. Williams finally showed some spine. This isn't relevant to fraud charges against Mr. Crowell.
I'm establishing the violent nature of Miss Hale's chosen associate, Hutchinson explained smoothly. The questioning grew worse. Hutchinson dredged up every military action, every moment of violence in Taza's service to the country that now used it against him. By the time he finished, murmurs rippled through the crowd, fear mixing with fascination at the dangerous Apache in their midst. Then something unexpected happened. Deputy Eli Carter, sitting in the witness section, stood up. "Your Honor, I have information relevant to this case." Thornfield frowned. "You're not scheduled to testify, Deputy." "No, sir, but I can't sit quiet anymore." Eli moved forward despite Hutchinson's protests. "I have evidence that Mr. Crowell attempted to bribe me to falsify reports about Miss Hale's property." The courtroom exploded in noise. Crowell half rose from his seat, face purpling, before his lawyers restrained him. "When?" Williams asked quickly, seizing the opportunity. "Last week, and again yesterday." Eli produced an envelope. $500 to testify that I saw Miss Hale and the Apache in compromising circumstances. I kept the money as evidence." "This is outrageous," Hutchinson shouted.
"This witness hasn't been properly vetted."
"You opened the door to character testimony?" Thornfield observed dryly. "Deputy Carter, take the stand."
Eli's testimony was devastating in its simplicity. He laid out the bribe attempts, Crowell's exact words, the implicit threats when Eli initially refused. "He said I was young, had my whole career ahead of me. Said it would be a shame if certain people heard I was protecting Apache lovers and loose women." Eli's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "That's when I knew I had to speak up. A man who'd bribe law enforcement would falsify anything." Crowell's control finally snapped. He surged to his feet, pointing at Marion. "That woman has bewitched half this town, her and that savage." "Mr. Crowell, control yourself." Thornfield banged his gavel. "I built this town. These people owe me everything. I won't be brought down by a harlot and her Apache." The word he used then was so vile that several women gasped. Even his own lawyers stepped back. In that moment, Crowell revealed himself completely, the civilized mask falling away to show the brutal greed beneath. "Marshal, restrain the defendant," Thornfield ordered coldly. As the marshal's men moved in, chaos erupted. Someone Marion never saw who shouted, "Let the Apache speak for himself." Taza stood slowly, his dignity intact despite everything thrown at him. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the warehouse. Mr. Crowell calls me savage. Maybe so, by his measure. But I've never stolen land, never forged documents, never burned down a barn with horses inside." He looked directly at Crowell. "My people have a saying the coyote calls the wolf a thief while gnawing stolen bones." "Your people are conquered dogs," Crowell snarled, struggling against the marshal's grip. The silence that followed was complete. Even Crowell's supporters looked away. In trying to destroy others, he'd destroyed himself. The rest of the trial proceeded swiftly. Nora Finch testified about conversations she'd overheard. Crowell bragging about his plans. Father Miguel, finding courage at last, presented records showing Crowell's systematic targeting of vulnerable landholders. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Lupa, the old Apache medicine woman. She entered leaning on a mesquite walking stick, her presence commanding respect despite her small stature. "I knew this one as a boy," she said, pointing a gnarled finger at Taza. "Saved my grandson from drowning. Brought medicine when the fever came." Her ancient eyes found Crowell. "This man speaks of savages. But which one burns barns? Which one steals with paper instead of honor?" When she spoke of water rights, her testimony reached back generations. She described agreements made before Crowell was born, when Apache and Mexican settlers shared the precious resource. Her words painted a picture of cooperation that Crowell's greed had shattered. Water belongs to the land, she concluded. Land belongs to those who tend it with respect. This woman, she indicated Marion, tends with respect. Her mother before her. That is law older than your papers. By the time closing arguments began, the tide had turned completely. Williams, emboldened by the testimony, found his voice at last. Gentlemen of the jury, you've heard Mr. Crowell in his own words. You've seen his methods: bribery, forgery, arson, intimidation. He asks you to ignore all this because he employs men, because he brings money to town. But what good is prosperity built on theft? Hutchinson tried to salvage the case, arguing technicalities and procedures, but the damage was done. When Crowell took the stand in his own defense, his arrogance sealed his fate. I made this town, he declared. Without me, you'd all be scratching in the dirt. If I bent a few rules, it was for the greater good. Whose good? Williams asked quietly. The good of progress, the good of civilization. These people, he gestured dismissively at Marion and Taza. They're the past. I'm the future. A future built on lies, a future built on strength. Crowell's mask slipped again. The weak deserve what they get. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, their faces were grim but determined. Guilty, the foreman announced. On all counts. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered. Others sat stunned that the territory's most powerful man had fallen. Crowell himself seemed to shrink, his bluster evaporating as the marshal's men led him away. 5 years hard labor. Judge Thornfield pronounced, and restitution to all wronged parties. Mr. Crowell, you spoke of civilization. Perhaps breaking rocks in Yuma prison will teach you what that truly means. Outside the warehouse, the crowd dispersed slowly, everyone discussing what they'd witnessed. Marion found herself surrounded by well-wishers ranchers who'd suffered under Crowell's schemes, townspeople who'd stayed silent too long. Your mother would be proud. Old Murdoch said gruffly, standing up like that took courage. She accepted their congratulations graciously, but her eyes searched for Taza. She found him by the horses, separate from the celebration. We won, she said softly. You won. His expression was unreadable. Crowell's gone. Your land is safe. Our land, if... She hesitated, then forged ahead. If you'll stay. He looked at her then, and she saw the struggle in his eyes. You heard what they said, what they think. Being with me will always bring whispers. Let them whisper. She touched his face gently. I know what I heard in that courtroom. I heard a man of honor speak truth. I heard courage and dignity. That's all I need to hear. Something in him seemed to break and mend in the same moment. He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. There's a ceremony, he said roughly. My people's way, but also the white way, if you want. Make it proper in both worlds. Yes, she said simply. To both? Around them, Dry Creek buzzed with change. Crowell's empire would crumble. Debts would be forgiven. Land would return to rightful owners. The future stretched uncertain, but no longer hopeless. As they rode home together, Marion thought of her mother's words. The land doesn't care who you are, only how you treat it. The same was true of love, she realized. It didn't care about skin color or social convention. It cared only that two hearts had found each other across impossible odds and chosen to beat as one. Tomorrow they would face new challenges. There would always be those who condemned their choice. But tonight, with justice served and truth triumphant, she allowed herself to believe in the future they would build together. The sun set behind them as they reached the ranch, painting the sky in shades of hope. The rebuilt barn stood strong against the horizon, testament to what could be accomplished when people worked together. Home, Taza said quietly, and the word held new meaning. Home, she agreed, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.
The wind shifted just after midnight, carrying with it the acrid smell of smoke. Marian woke instantly, her body trained by the earlier fire to recognize danger. Through her window, orange light flickered against the darkness, not from her property, but from the direction of the creek that fed the valley's water supply. She pulled on clothes and boots, grabbing her father's rifle. Outside, Taza was already saddling horses, his movements swift and economical in the moonlight. "The grasslands by Cooper's Bend," he said without preamble. "If it jumps the creek..." He didn't need to finish. If fire crossed the water barrier, it would race through the drought-dry valley, consuming everything in its path: homes, barns, lives. "The Pikes," she said, not a question but a certainty. Crowell's last order before prison. "Doesn't matter who now, only matters that we stop it." They rode hard toward the glow, passing other riders heading the same direction. Word spread fast and the valley fire was everyone's enemy. By the time they reached Cooper's Bend, dozens of men and women had gathered, their faces grim in the hellish light. Tom Avery was organizing groups with the efficiency of someone who'd fought grass fires before. "Need folks along the creek to wet down the banks," he called. "Others start a backfire here, burn toward the main fire so they meet in the middle with nothing left to feed on." "Wind's building," someone shouted. "Shifting east." Marian's heart sank. East meant toward the densest cluster of homesteads, including the widow Martinez's place with her 7 children. "I'll take a group up canyon," Taza said to Avery. "Can cut a fire break at Skeleton Ridge. Stop it spreading that way." Avery hesitated only a moment before nodding. Whatever prejudices remained, fire made them irrelevant. "Take who you need." To Marian's surprise, several young men immediately volunteered to go with Taza ranch hands who'd seen him work, who trusted his knowledge of the land over their learned biases. "I'm going to help evacuate the Martinez place," Marian told him. He caught her hand briefly. "Be careful. Fire's hungry tonight." Then they separated, each to their desperate task. Marian joined a group of women loading children and belongings onto wagons while men drove livestock to safety. The widow Martinez wept as she watched her small home disappear behind walls of smoke. 20 years building that place, she mourned. "Buildings can be rebuilt," Marian said firmly, lifting the youngest Martinez child into a wagon. "Children can't." The fire crowned in the trees with a sound like a living thing, roaring its hunger. Sparks flew like deadly snow, starting spot fires wherever they landed. Marian beat out flames with wet burlap until her arms ached, her lungs burning from smoke. Through the chaos, she heard Deputy Eli coordinating efforts, his youth forgotten in the crisis. He'd organized bucket brigades from the creek, humans chains passing water with desperate efficiency. "Miss Hale," he appeared through the smoke. "That Apache fellow of yours, he saved the Hendricks family. Whole house was surrounded, but he got them out through the root cellar." Pride swelled through her exhaustion. Of course he had. Taza would always run toward danger if innocents needed help. The battle raged for hours. At some point, the distinction between neighbor and stranger, white and Mexican and Apache, dissolved in shared struggle. She found herself working beside people who'd shunned her in town, passing buckets, beating flames, united in survival. Then a miracle, or perhaps just the desert's caprice, the wind died. Without its driving force, the fire slowed, became manageable. The backfires Taza's crew had set worked as planned, creating a burn zone the main fire couldn't cross. As dawn broke gray and smoky, the immediate danger passed. Exhausted firefighters collapsed where they stood. Sharing water, tending burns, the landscape looked like a war zone, blackened earth, skeletal trees, smoke rising from hot spots. Marian found Taza near the creek, washing soot from a gash on his arm. His shirt was ruined, his face lined with exhaustion, but he was whole. "You're hurt," she said. "Tree branch. Nothing serious." He looked at her with concern. "You tired?"
Scared, angry.
She slumped beside him on a log. The Pikes are long gone. I assume Eli found their camp, still warm. They'll be in Mexico by now. He wrapped his arm carefully. But they failed. No lives lost. Even saved most of the buildings. Thanks to you. Thanks to everyone. He gestured at the scattered groups, white ranchers sharing coffee with Apache fighters, Mexican farmers tending Anglo children. Fire doesn't care about the lines we draw. Old Sam Murdoch approached, his weathered face thoughtful. That was good work with the fire break. Young man. Learned that in the army. Learned it from my grandfather. Taza replied. Apache been fighting prairie fires since before memory. Murdoch absorbed this, then extended his hand. Well, grateful either way. It was a small gesture, but Marion saw Taza's surprise as he shook the offered hand. First steps. She thought change came slowly, but it came. As the sun climbed higher, the full scope of damage became clear. 3 homesteads lost, countless acres of grassland destroyed. But it could have been so much worse. The water source remained protected. The main valley settlement stood intact. We'll need to pool resources for rebuilding. Tom Avery announced to the gathered crowd. Widow Martinez and the other burned-out families need help first. I can spare lumber, one rancher offered. Got extra cattle feed, said another. The offers came quickly, not charity, but community. People who'd faced death together now facing recovery the same way. Even some of Crowell's former associates, freed from his influence, stepped forward with aid. I know where there's good timber, Taza said quietly. Up mountain, fire won't have reached it. Take a crew, Avery said immediately. We'll need all we can cut. That afternoon, as Marion helped sort donated supplies, Nora Finch approached with her characteristic bustle. Well, that was something. The boarding house keeper said, That man of yours turning out to be quite the hero. He's not my man, Marion corrected automatically, then caught Nora's knowing look. All right, perhaps he is. About time you admitted it. Half the town's been taking bets on when you'd make it official. Nora's expression grew serious. You know there'll still be talk. Some folks won't ever accept it. I know. But after last night, Nora gestured at the mixed groups working together. Harder to hate someone who saved your barn. Isn't it young Jenny Briggs has been going on about how the Apache man carried her prize calf to safety? Her father looked ready to chew nails. But what could he say? It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was a start. Throughout the day, Marion noticed small signs of shifting attitudes. A rancher's wife asking Taza about burn treatment using traditional plants. Young men including him naturally in their work crews. Children, always less burdened by their parents' prejudices, following him with open curiosity. That evening, Father Miguel held an impromptu service of Thanksgiving in the field beside the church. All faiths and backgrounds gathered, even Mrs. Lupa came, supported by younger Apache women. We have been tested, Father Miguel said in his gentle voice. By fire, by greed, by our own prejudices. But see how we stand together now. This is the true message that in our common humanity, we find God's grace. As hymns rose in English, Spanish, and Apache, Marion felt something shift in the community's fabric. Not a complete healing that would take generations, but a recognition that survival meant more than old hatreds. Later, as the moon rose over the scarred landscape, she and Taza sat on her porch watching the valley settle into exhausted peace. Eli brought news from town. Taza said, With Crowell gone and his syndicate broken, the territorial government is reviewing all the land claims. Many will revert to original owners, including the Apache treaty lands. Some, not all, but some. He was quiet for a moment. My people want me to help negotiate, speak for them in the white courts. Fear clutched her heart. Will you go? Would you come with me?
The question surprised her. To the reservation? To wherever this leads. Phoenix for the legal hearings. The reservation to consult with elders. Here to build our life. He turned to face her fully. I'm asking you to walk between worlds with me. Yes, she said without hesitation. Though I don't know how much help I'll be in your world. You stood for us in court. You work beside us in crisis. You see people, not just colors. He touched her face gently. That's more than most can say. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The sound that once seemed lonely now felt like connection voices across the darkness, claiming their place. When do we leave for Phoenix? She asked. Next week. But first, he reached into his pocket, producing something wrapped in soft leather. I finished this before the fire. She unwrapped it carefully, gasping at what lay within. A hair comb carved from pale wood, decorated with delicate flowers and running horses so detailed they seemed ready to leap from the surface. But what caught her breath was the pattern along the handle mountains and flowing water, the landscape of their home captured in miniature. It's beautiful, she whispered, for our ceremony. When we return, he took it gently, sliding it into her hair where it caught the moonlight. If you still... She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her certainty into the touch. When they parted, his eyes held the same wonder she felt. I should tell you, she said against his lips. Half the town is betting on our wedding date. What odds are they giving? Nora says Christmas. Tom Avery insists we'll wait for spring. What do you say? She considered. I say as soon as Father Miguel and your elders can both bless it. Let them figure out the details while we're in Phoenix. His laugh rumbled through his chest. Practical. Someone has to be. They sat in comfortable silence, her head on his shoulder, watching the stars emerge through lingering smoke. The valley bore scars that would last years, but already she could envision the new growth that would come. Fire cleared the old to make way for the new. Perhaps that was true of communities as well as grasslands. Thank you, she said suddenly. For what? For staying after the fire, after the trial. You could have disappeared back into the mountains. No, he said simply. I couldn't. She understood. The same invisible threads that bound her to this land now bound them to each other. Not chains, but choices, renewed each day in small acts of courage and care. A horse whinnied from the corral buttercup, probably wondering why her evening grain was late. The ordinary sound grounded Marion in the present moment. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Phoenix lawyers and reservation politics and the slow work of rebuilding trust. But tonight, she sat with the man she loved on the porch of the home they'd defended, looking out over a valley that had chosen unity over division in its darkest hour. It was enough. More than enough, it was the beginning of everything. The morning of the trial's conclusion brought unexpected rain, not the violent storms of summer, but a gentle, persistent shower that turned the desert green with promise. 6 weeks had passed since the fire, since Phoenix, since the ceremonies that bound Marion and Taza in both worlds. Now Dry Creek gathered once more to witness the final legal disposition of Crowell's crimes. Marshal Richards himself had come from Tucson to oversee the proceedings, with Crowell already beginning his sentence in Yuma. This hearing would determine restitution and restore proper ownership to those he'd wronged. Quite a crowd, Taza observed as they approached the courthouse. Indeed, the building overflowed. Word had spread that today would see justice, not just proclaimed, but enacted deeds returned, fraudulent claims voided, rightful ownership restored. For many families, it meant the difference between staying and leaving. Inside, Judge Thornfield presided with the weight of territorial authority behind him. Stacks of documents covered the prosecutor's table, the twisted paper trail of Crowell's empire unraveled thread by thread. We'll begin with the water rights, Thornfield announced, based on authenticated Spanish grants and traditional use documentation provided by tribal authorities.
All of Crowell's claims are void. Water access reverts to historical patterns. A collective exhale ran through the room. Water meant life in the desert, and its equitable distribution meant survival for all. The litany continued. The widow Martinez learned her husband's mining claim, stolen through forged documentation, was hers again. The Hendricks family recovered grazing lands. Even some of Crowell's former associates, themselves victimized by his manipulations, saw debts forgiven and properties restored. Regarding the Hale Ranch, Thornfield's voice carried clearly. All claims against it are dismissed. Furthermore, given the fraudulent nature of the original loan, the court orders full restitution from Crowell's assets. Marion gripped Taza's hand, scarcely believing. Not only was the ranch secure, but she'd receive compensation for the harassment and damages suffered. There's more. Williams, the prosecutor, stood. The territorial government has authorized a new water-sharing compact. All parties, Anglo, Mexican, and Apache, will have representation in its management. I nominate Joseph Taza for the Apache seat. Tom Avery called out, using the name Taza had adopted for legal documents. Man knows water and land better than anyone. The approval was swift and unanimous, a far cry from the suspicion of months past. Taza stood to accept, his dignity filling the room. I'll serve, he said simply. Water feeds all our children. It should be guarded by all our peoples. As the hearing concluded and people filed out into the rain-washed afternoon, Marion felt the change in the community spirit. Neighbors who'd been set against each other by Crowell's manipulations spoke of cooperation. The fire had started it, but this restoration completed something deeper. Miss Hale, Mrs. Taza. Father Miguel corrected himself with a smile, approaching them outside. I wanted you to know the mission has received a donation from several ranchers to establish a school, one that welcomes all children.
That's wonderful. Father?
We were hoping it... He looked at Taza. Would you consider teaching the older children about the land traditional knowledge alongside modern learning? Taza's surprise was evident.
You want Apache teachings in your school?
I want truth in our school. And truth includes the wisdom of those who knew this land first. It was another small miracle in a day full of them. As they walked through town, Marion noticed other changes. The general store displayed Apache baskets alongside imported goods. Young ranch hands practiced phrases in multiple languages. The invisible walls that had divided the community showed gaps where connection could grow. Back at the ranch, they found unexpected visitors. Mrs. Lupa sat on the porch with two younger Apache women, their horses tethered nearby. Grandmother. Taza greeted her respectfully in Apache. She replied in the same language, then switched to English for Marion's benefit. Came to see this new thing you've built, this joining of worlds. You're welcome here, Marion said, meaning it, always. The old woman studied her with those ancient eyes. You speak truth. Good. She gestured to her companions. My granddaughters. They want to learn horse medicine, the mixing of ways your mother practiced. I'd be honored to teach what I know. And they will teach you. Lupa smiled. Fair trade. As the women settled to talk, Taza walked with Marion to the barn, their barn now, rebuilt stronger than before. Inside, the horses dozed in the afternoon quiet, content and well-fed. Did you imagine this? Marion asked. When you first helped me that day at the spring? No. He ran his hand along a beam they'd placed together. Thought I'd help, move on. Didn't expect... To stay. To find home. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Through the barn doors, they could see the valley stretching green under clearing skies. The fire scars remained but softened now with new growth. Eli rode out this morning. Taza mentioned. Said there's talk of making him full sheriff next election. Wants my endorsement. Will you give it? He stood for truth when it cost him. Yes, I'll speak for him.
It was another thread in the new fabric they were all weaving, Apache voice mattering in Anglo elections. Young men like Eli learning that justice meant more than law books. That evening, as had become their custom, they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The simple wedding band on Marion's finger caught the light. Taza had crafted it from silver and turquoise, materials of both their traditions. Her mother's ring rested on her right hand, connecting past and future. "Letter came while you were at the water meeting," she said, producing an envelope. "From the Indian agency." He read it slowly, his expression thoughtful. "They want me to guide a delegation, Apache leaders meeting with Washington officials about the treaty modifications." "That's wonderful. Your voice in those rooms." "Our voice," he corrected. "They want you to," said the wife who stood in court for Apache rights should stand in the Capitol. Washington, the very heart of American power, as far from their desert home as the moon. Yet Marion felt no hesitation. "When do we leave?" "Spring, after foaling season." He smiled. "Practical. Always." They spoke of preparations, of the ranch hands they'd need to hire, of the journey itself. But underneath ran a current of something larger, the recognition that their personal choice had become something beyond them. Two people who'd found each other across impossible divisions now stood as proof that such bridges could be built. "I've been thinking," Marion said as stars emerged in the darkening sky, "about children." Taza's hand found hers. "What thoughts?" "That they'll grow up in a different world than we did. Not easy, but different. They'll know both traditions from birth. Maybe that will make them strong enough to help heal what our generation couldn't." "Children of two worlds," he murmured. "Citizens of both, strangers to neither." "Is that what you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. "My greatest fear was passing on a legacy of loss. But now," he gestured at the lamplit windows of town, at the Apache women's horses in their corral, at the land itself renewed by fire and rain. "Now I think we might pass on a legacy of building." A coyote called in the distance, that wild sound that had once seemed lonely to Marion. Now she heard it differently, as Taza had taught her. Not loneliness, but presence. Not isolation, but claiming of place, the desert speaking in its ancient voice, reminding all who listened that boundaries were human inventions, that the land itself knew only continuity. "Next week marks a year," she realized suddenly. "Since the first fire, since you came, since everything changed." "Are you sorry for any of it?" He turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw their journey reflected every challenge faced, every prejudice confronted, every small victory won. "How can I be sorry for finding my heart?" She kissed him then, there on the porch of the home they'd defended and rebuilt, in the valley that had become a symbol of what determination and love could accomplish. When they parted, she saw their future stretched before them, not easy. Never that, but possible in ways it hadn't been a year ago. "Come," Taza said, standing and offering his hand. "The horses need their evening grain, and I want to check that yearling's leg." Simple words, domestic tasks, the rhythm of ranch life continuing. But Marion heard the deeper truth in them. This was how change really happened. Not in grand gestures alone, but in daily choices to build rather than tear down, to trust rather than fear, to see common humanity across lines others drew in sand. She took his offered hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, earned through shared labor. Together they walked to the barn, to their horses, to their life that proved love could grow even in the harshest ground. Behind them, the house stood solid against the night, no longer just her inheritance, but their creation. Before them, the land stretched endless and demanding, promising nothing but possibility to those brave enough to claim it. And in her heart, steady as the pulse that had first drawn them together, Marion felt the truth that no amount of opposition could shake. They belonged to each other, to this place, to the future they were building one day at a time. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and coming rain. Somewhere in the darkness,
That coyote called again, answered by its mate. Life in all its complex beauty continued, and they were part of it, woven into its pattern as surely as water-carved stone, as certainly as sunrise followed night. Their story was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share your thoughts in the comments below so we can connect and discuss this tale together. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means everything.